The Hook Daniel sat alone in his small, dimly lit house on the edge of a rugged frontier planet. His boots were kicked off by the door, and the soft hum of the generator was the only sound in the room. It was quiet, too quiet. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, life was simple. But sometimes that was the problem. He stared at the small ad on his hollow screen. Help wanted. Cook, clean, small pay, private room. He'd tried everything to get some work done around the house. A couple of men had come through, but none of them stayed long enough to make any difference. Either they didn't care for the isolation, or they just couldn't handle the rough work. But now, after weeks of living like this, Daniel knew he needed help. With a sigh, he hit send. The ad blinked, ready to be posted to the outer world job boards. The days dragged on. It was late in the evening when the message came through. A request for the job. He didn't expect anyone to respond so quickly. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened the message, and his fingers hesitated over the accept button. The name of the sender was Lira, a woman. She had no reference, no track record, but something in her eyes, what he could see from the blurry image, made him think she might be what he needed. The message was simple. I can start tomorrow. I'll arrive in 2 days. No questions, no asking for details. She just seemed ready. He had heard stories of aliens from other planets coming to settle in places like this. Alien species fleeing their troubled worlds. But none of those stories prepared him for what happened next. He thought he was hiring a simple, quiet worker. What he didn't know was that Lira wasn't just an ordinary woman, and she would change his life forever. The day Lira arrived, Daniel wasn't sure what to expect. He had been pacing around his tiny house all morning, adjusting things he didn't need to adjust. His hands were sweaty, his throat dry. He didn't even know why he was nervous. After all, it was just a job. He wasn't expecting anything more than someone to help with chores. Maybe he was just lonely. The sound of a ship landing outside broke his thoughts. He glanced out the window, his heart beating a little faster. A sleek silver craft settled onto the ground with a quiet hum. It wasn't huge, but it was definitely foreign to him. Daniel opened the door just as the hatch opened. A figure emerged, tall and slim, her movements almost graceful. She wore a loose tunic, her hair dark and shiny, her skin pale with faint patterns swirling across it. Her eyes, large and glowing faintly with a soft purple hue, caught his attention instantly. She wasn't like the humans in this area. There was something different about her, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Lira? Daniel asked, his voice a little shaky. She nodded with a small smile. Yes. I'm here for the job. Her voice was soft, but it had a calm power to it, like the air just before a storm. It was impossible to ignore. Daniel stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. The first few days were quiet. Lira worked hard, and Daniel couldn't help but notice how she seemed to glide rather than walk, how her movements were more fluid than any human he'd known. She wasn't clumsy like the others who had come by. She cleaned, cooked, and repaired, things in ways he hadn't expected. She didn't need much instruction, she just did it, and it looked effortless. But there was something about her that kept him up at night, something about the way she would stare out the window when she thought. He wasn't looking. There was sadness in her eyes, something hidden deep down. He tried not to stare, but it was hard not to notice. Every time she moved, every time she spoke, there was an aura of mystery around her. And every now and then, he saw a faint flicker of something, an emotion, maybe fear, pass across her face. One evening, Daniel came home to find the house eerily quiet. Normally, Lira would be humming to herself while preparing dinner. Tonight, there was no sound. He pushed open the door to find her standing by the window, looking out into the endless stretch of wilderness. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, in the fading light. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice low. Lira didn't turn to face him. "I'm fine. Just thinking." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't explain why, but something about her tone sent a signal to his brain that told him not to press her any further. Over the next few days, things started to change. Lira seemed to be more withdrawn, more distant. She no longer hummed while she worked. Instead, she spent long hours staring out the window or in the small room she had made her own. When Daniel tried to speak with her, she gave vague answers, dodging his questions, and then one night something happened that Daniel couldn't ignore. He woke up to the sound of muffled sobs. He sat up in bed, his heart racing. It wasn't a loud cry, but it was enough to draw him out of his room. Quietly, he made his way to the source of the noise, the kitchen. There she was, standing near the stove, her back to him, her shoulders shaking as she cried. It was the first time he had seen her so vulnerable, so broken. "Lira." Daniel's voice cracked. He wasn't sure what to say next. She wiped her eyes, turning slowly to face him. For the first time, her eyes were full of raw emotion. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Daniel stepped closer, but he didn't know what to do. He wasn't good at comforting people. He had never been good at it. But this felt different. This wasn't just a cry of sadness. It felt like a cry for help. Lira looked at him, her face a mask of pain. "You don't understand. I'm not who you think I am." The words hung in the air between them. And for the first time, Daniel realized just how little he knew about the woman he had hired. She wasn't just an alien widow. She was someone hiding a secret that could change everything. This was just the beginning. Daniel had no idea what was coming. And neither did Lira. But one thing was certain. Their worlds were about to collide in ways neither of them could imagine. The widow's secret days passed, and the quiet routine of Daniel's home continued. The wind howled outside, but inside, it was calm. Daniel found himself growing used to Lira's presence. She moved like a shadow, always working, always present, but never speaking much of herself. It was as if there was a part of her that was forever locked away, something she wasn't ready or perhaps able to share. Lira worked harder than anyone Daniel had ever hired. She scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, cooked meals that reminded him of the ones his mother used to make, and took care of the animals as if she had done it all her life. Daniel was grateful for her help, but the silence that surrounded her made him uneasy. There were times when she seemed to forget he was even there. She would sit in the corner of the room, lost in thought, staring at the wall as if searching for something only she could see. It was on one such evening when Daniel noticed something strange. He had returned early from gathering supplies from the village, and as he walked toward the house, he saw Lira standing by the barn. She wasn't moving. Her back was straight, her arms crossed over her chest, and she was staring at the stars, her face pale under the dim light of the moon. He called her name, but she didn't respond. He approached her cautiously, wondering if she was all right. "Lira?" he asked again. This time she turned slowly, her large purple eyes gleaming in the moonlight. There was something different in them, a sadness, a depth that wasn't there before. For a moment, Daniel saw something in her eyes that made his heart skip a beat, something raw and unspoken, like a flood of emotions threatening to spill over. "I'm fine," she said softly, her voice flat. "Just thinking." But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He had seen this before, people trying to hide their pain. But Lira wasn't like anyone he had known before. She was an alien, an outsider, and the distance between them was growing every day. That night, Daniel stayed up later than usual, his mind racing with thoughts of Lira. He couldn't understand why she was so distant, so closed off. He thought back to the day she had arrived. She had seemed so confident, so self-assured, yet now she appeared to be slowly unraveling before him. It was then that he heard it, the faintest whisper, a sound so soft he almost thought he imagined it. Lira's voice, but not speaking to him. She was speaking to someone, no, something else. Daniel froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He stood in the hallway, listening intently. The words were in a language he didn't understand, a strange, melodic rhythm that sent a shiver down his spine. He had no idea what she was saying, but there was an urgency in her tone, a pleading, almost desperate quality that made his stomach turn. Without thinking, he moved toward the source of the sound, the small room Lira had made her own. The door was slightly ajar, and Daniel pushed it open carefully, his breath held in his chest. Inside, he saw Lira standing by her bed, her head tilted back as if she were listening to something far away. Her eyes were closed and her lips moved silently as she spoke the strange language. But what shocked him most was the glow that surrounded her, a faint light that seemed to come from deep within her skin. It was as if her entire being was alive with energy. Daniel couldn't look away. There was something hypnotic about the sight, something that drew him in. She wasn't just an ordinary alien. There was power in her, something beyond human understanding, something dangerous. Suddenly Lyra's eyes snapped open and the glow vanished. She looked directly at Daniel, and for the first time there was no hiding the fear in her gaze. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't have seen that." Daniel stepped back, his heart racing. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. He didn't know what to say, what to do. Lira was hiding something, and now he was certain of it. But what? She took a deep breath and stepped toward him, her movement slow and deliberate. "I didn't want you to know," she said quietly. "But you're right to be afraid." Her words hit him like a punch to the stomach. "Afraid of what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lira looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "My past," she said, her voice filled with regret. "I didn't choose to come here, Daniel. I had no choice. I didn't think you would ever find out, but now I've put us both in danger." "Put us in danger?" Daniel repeated, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. Lira nodded, her eyes full of sorrow. "You don't understand. Where I come from, people like me, widows, exiled, are hunted. My people are feared. They say that anyone who gets close to us will end up dead. I thought I could escape it, but I was wrong." Daniel didn't know what to say. His mind was spinning. She was running from something. But what? Who was hunting her? Why had she chosen to hide here with him? He felt a pang of sympathy for her, but also a creeping fear. This wasn't the quiet widow he had hired. This was someone with a dangerous past, someone who could bring trouble into his life whether he wanted it or not. "You're not safe here, Daniel," Lira whispered. "Neither of us are." For the first time, Daniel truly understood the weight of what Lira was carrying. She wasn't just running from her past, she was running from something that could change everything, something powerful, something deadly. As the silence between them grew, Daniel knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change. He could turn her away, send her back to wherever she had come from. But something told him he couldn't do that. He wasn't just her employer anymore. He was part of her story now. And the price of knowing that secret, of knowing her, was higher than anything he had ever imagined. Trust and danger days blurred together as Daniel's world grew more complicated. The unease he had felt since Lyra's arrival seemed to deepen with every passing hour. She was no longer the quiet, hard-working, alien woman he had hired to help with chores. She was something more, something he couldn't understand completely, and something that seemed determined to keep him at arm's length. Despite her growing distance, there were moments when the two of them seemed to connect in small, fleeting ways. He noticed the way she smiled slightly when she passed him a cup of tea, or how her eyes softened when they shared a quiet meal together. These moments, though rare, gave him a sense of warmth, a fleeting sense of peace that made him want to ignore the tension that hung in the air. But the stories, the warnings from the villagers, they kept coming. "Watch yourself around that woman," the old farmer Clint had warned him one morning while Daniel was out buying supplies. Clint had been a neighbor for years, always watching the comings and goings of the few settlers on the planet. "She's hiding something and you're letting her in your house. You don't know what you're dealing with." At the time, Daniel had shrugged it off. What did Clint know? He was just another old man who liked to spread rumors. But now, with Lyra's secret weighing heavily on his mind, Daniel couldn't. help but wonder if Clint was right. He had tried to ask her more about where she came from, but Lira always deflected. Whenever he got too close to the truth, she would retreat into silence. And when Daniel asked about her past, she looked away with an expression of guilt that made his heart race. It was clear that whatever had happened to her, it was something she didn't want to talk about. Then one evening, everything changed. Daniel had been out in the fields fixing a broken fence when he saw a group of men approaching the house. They weren't from the village. He could tell by their rough clothes and the way they moved. There was something about them that screamed trouble. They didn't belong here. He turned and hurried back toward the house, his heart pounding. By the time he reached the front door, the men were already on the porch. One of them, a tall man, with a scar running down the side of his face, stepped forward. "Is this where the alien widow lives?" the man asked, his voice cold. Daniel didn't answer right away. He knew something wasn't right, but he had no idea who these men were or what they wanted. "What's this about?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. His mind was racing. The man with the scar smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We're looking for someone who owes us a debt. We've tracked her down, and we're not leaving until we get what we came for." Daniel's stomach twisted. He knew exactly who they were talking about. Lira. "She's not here," Daniel lied, stepping forward to block the door. "You'll have to leave." The men exchanged glances, and the tall one raised an eyebrow. "You don't get it, do you? She's the one we want. She's got something that belongs to us, and we're not leaving until we get it." Daniel's mind raced as he looked past them toward the barn where Lira had been earlier that day. He could only hope she hadn't heard them yet. "You don't want to do this," Daniel said, his voice shaking. He wasn't sure why he was protecting her. She had her secrets, and she had kept him in the dark for so long. But there was something inside him, a feeling he couldn't ignore, that made him want to protect her. The scarred man laughed, stepping closer. "You're just the hired help, aren't you? You don't understand the danger you're in, but you will." Before Daniel could react, the man raised his hand, signaling to his companions. Two of them stepped forward, each carrying a large, heavy weapon that looked like a cross between a rifle and a bladed staff. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He was no match for them. These men weren't just here to talk, they were here to make sure they got what they wanted. In that moment, something inside Daniel snapped. He wasn't going to let these men hurt her. Not after everything she had shared, not after the way she had protected him from danger before. "I said leave," Daniel growled, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his chest. The scarred man didn't flinch. Instead, he pointed a finger toward the barn. "She's in there, isn't she?" Before Daniel could stop them, the men charged. They moved quickly, too quickly for Daniel to react. But just as they reached the door, a voice rang out, cold and commanding. "Stop." The men froze. Lira stood at the top of the porch stairs, her face pale but her eyes glowing faintly. The men didn't move. They looked at her with a mixture of fear and respect, and for the first time, Daniel understood just how much power she held. "I won't say it again," Lira said, her voice calm but filled with a quiet authority. "Leave. Now." The tall man with the scar laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "You think you can just tell us to leave? We know what you're hiding. We're not scared of you." For a moment there was silence. Lira stepped forward, and Daniel could feel the shift in the air, the tension that had been building since she arrived. Something changed in her, a power that he hadn't seen before, something ancient and strong. Without a word, Lira raised her hand. The air around her seemed to shimmer, and the ground beneath the men's feet began to shake. The men stumbled back, eyes wide in shock. "You're making a mistake," Lira said softly, her voice unwavering. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The men took one look at her, and without another word, they turned and fled into the night, leaving Daniel standing there, stunned. Lira stood still, her hand still raised, her eyes distant, as if she were lost in some other world. Who were they?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. Lira lowered her hand slowly and turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but the sadness in her eyes was undeniable. They were part of my past, she said softly. And they won't be the last. Daniel's mind raced. This was bigger than he had imagined. Lira's secret was no longer just a secret. It was a danger that would follow them wherever they went. As the night settled in, Daniel knew one thing for certain. His life, and Lira's, would never be the same again. Growing closer. The morning after the confrontation with the men, Daniel's thoughts were a tangled mess. His mind replayed the scene over and over, Lira's strange power, the way the men had reacted, and the fear that had flashed in their eyes. It all seemed unreal, like something out of a story. But it had happened. He couldn't deny it. Lira was no ordinary woman. She wasn't just an alien widow running from her past. She was something far more dangerous. And the way she had protected them without hesitation made Daniel feel both awe and terror. He found himself thinking about her more than he should have, his thoughts drifting to the moments when she had shared small pieces of her story with him. Though she had been distant, those brief glimpses of her pain, her fear, and her quiet strength left an impression on him that wouldn't go away. That evening, as the sun began to set and the winds outside picked up, Daniel found himself standing in the doorway, looking out at the vast landscape. The barn, the fields, and the distant mountain peaks all seemed endless. This place, isolated and harsh, had once felt like a home to him, but now it felt like a cage. The weight of Lira's secret hung over him, and with every passing day he felt that he was being drawn deeper into a world he didn't understand. Lira had come to him in search of safety, and yet, the more he learned about her, the more he realized that she wasn't just trying to escape her past. She was running from something that could destroy them both. Daniel? Her voice cut through his thoughts, soft but steady. He turned to find her standing behind him, her expression calm, though her eyes betrayed a sense of quiet worry. "I didn't mean to scare you yesterday," she said, stepping closer. "I didn't want you to know what I'm capable of, but I didn't have a choice." Daniel swallowed, his heart pounding in his chest. "You didn't scare me," he said, though he wasn't sure it was entirely true. "I'm just trying to understand." She nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "I know. I don't expect you to understand everything. Not yet. But I need you to trust me, Daniel." Trust. The word lingered in the air between them. He had trusted her. He had trusted her to help him with the work around the house, to keep the animals fed and the fires lit. But trusting her with something deeper, something more personal, that was different. The danger that followed her was not something he could ignore. He had never signed up for any of this, yet here they were. "You've been running from something your whole life, haven't you?" Daniel asked, his voice quieter now. Lira hesitated before answering. "Yes, I've been running from a war that my people started, a war that destroyed everything we knew. My husband was one of the soldiers who fought in it. But he died, and I was left to pick up the pieces." Daniel felt a wave of sympathy for her. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the way her past haunted her. But there was something else there too, a bitterness, a resignation that told him she hadn't just been a victim of war, she had been a part of it. "And now they're hunting you," Daniel said softly. Lira nodded. "Yes. My kind, the ones who survived, are feared by everyone. They say we carry the blood of the enemy, that we are cursed. I'm not like the others. I didn't want to be part of the war, but it doesn't matter. They see me as a threat, and so do the people here." Daniel's heart tightened. The pain in her voice was raw, and it made him realize just how much she had been through. But he also felt something else, something that terrified him as much as it drew him in. He wanted to protect her. But could he? Could he protect her from a past that was as dangerous as it was unforgiving? Lira stepped forward, closer to him now, her presence filling the space between them. She seemed hesitant, unsure of herself, and for the first time, Daniel saw the cracks in her armor. The powerful, untouchable woman who had saved him from danger was gone, replaced by someone more vulnerable. "I'm sorry for bringing this into your life," she whispered. "I never meant for you to get involved in this." Daniel looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I'm already involved," he said simply. "I can't just turn my back on you now." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, and in that instant, he felt something stir inside him, something deep and undeniable. Lira took a slow breath, her expression softening. "I never asked for your help, but I appreciate it more than you know." Daniel didn't know what to say. He wanted to reach out to comfort her, but the words seemed to fail him. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, though he knew it wasn't. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Lira didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at him, her gaze steady and calm. Slowly, as if she was testing the waters, she placed her hand in his. They stood there in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken words and emotions. For a moment, nothing else mattered. The past, the danger, the unknown. They all seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. But in the back of Daniel's mind, the fear still lingered. He knew they couldn't stay here forever, not with the men who had come for Lira still out there looking for her. He knew they couldn't outrun the past, no matter how far they went. But for now, he was willing to ignore it, to focus on the small connection that had begun to bloom between them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hold on to. As they stood together, the wind howling outside, Daniel realized one thing. Lira wasn't just a widow running from her past. She was a woman who had lost everything. And in his small, quiet way, he had become the one thing she needed. A safe place. And maybe, just maybe, that was all they could ask for. The turning point. The next few days were unlike any Daniel had experienced before. There was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere between him and Lira. They had crossed a line, one that had begun as mere curiosity, but had evolved into something far more complicated. Their quiet moments together, the small gestures of kindness, and the weight of shared secrets were slowly transforming their relationship. Daniel could no longer deny the growing attachment, nor could he ignore the danger that still lurked in the shadows. The farm, once a place of solitude and simplicity, now felt charged with tension. Daniel spent long hours working in the fields, trying to clear his mind. But his thoughts kept returning to Lira, the way she had looked at him that night, her soft touch when they had stood together in silence. She wasn't just an alien woman running from her past anymore. She had become someone he couldn't imagine living without. It was on a particularly hot afternoon when the danger Daniel had feared finally arrived. He had been working by the barn, fixing the broken gate, when he saw a group of strangers walking toward him from the horizon. At first he thought it was another group of settlers, but as they drew closer, Daniel's heart sank. These were the same men who had come to his house weeks ago, the ones with the scarred faces and the cold eyes. They were back, and this time they weren't here for a simple conversation. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had hoped they would leave, that Lira's warning would keep them away, but here they were, determined and relentless. He turned, quickly, racing back toward the house. His mind was frantic, his thoughts colliding with each other. What should he do? How could he protect her? By the time he reached the porch, the men were already at the front door, standing in a tight formation. They didn't look like they were in the mood for negotiation. The leader, the man with the scarred face, looked Daniel up and down, his cold eyes gleaming with a dark promise. "Where is she?" The man growled, his voice low and dangerous. Daniel stepped forward, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew what they wanted. He knew they wouldn't stop until they got it. "She's not here," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady, but the words felt hollow as soon as they left his mouth. The scarred man didn't believe him. "Don't lie to me, boy. We know she's here. We know she's hiding." Daniel's mind raced. He had to protect her, he had to do something. But what? He wasn't a fighter. He was just a man trying to survive on a planet that didn't care about his survival. Before he could respond, the men started to move toward the barn, their weapons drawn. Panic surged through Daniel. He couldn't let them find Lira. Not like this, not after everything she had done for him. He needed to buy time to think of a way out of this. As they passed the front door, Daniel stepped outside and shouted, "You'll have to go through me first." The scarred man turned slowly, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." The air grew heavy, thick with tension. Daniel could feel his pulse in his throat as he tried to steady his breathing. He had no plan, no backup, and no real way of defending himself. But he wasn't going to let these men take Lira, not after everything. Suddenly a voice rang out from behind him. "Stop." It was Lira. Daniel turned to find her standing on the porch, her figure outlined against the setting sun. She wasn't wearing any weapons, but there was something about her, something in the way she held herself that made the men hesitate. Her eyes were locked on the scarred man, and the power that radiated from her was unmistakable. "I won't let you take her," Daniel said, stepping closer to her. Lira didn't move, her gaze still fixed on the men. "You don't have a choice," she said, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable strength. The scarred man stepped forward, ignoring Daniel. "You think you can stop us?" he sneered. "You're nothing. You're just a man playing at hero." Lira didn't flinch. She raised her hand slowly, and the air around them seemed to pulse. The ground beneath their feet shifted, the earth trembling as if the very planet was responding to her command. The men stumbled back, their faces filled with confusion and fear. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Lira said softly, her voice carrying an otherworldly authority that made Daniel's skin prickle. "This is bigger than you." The scarred man hesitated, his eyes darting nervously as he realized the power he was up against. He took a step back, and then another, as if the very air around him had turned hostile. But he wasn't ready to. "Back down, not yet. We won't leave empty-handed," he spat, his hand reaching for the weapon at his side. Before he could pull it free, Lira acted. With a flick of her wrist, the weapon flew from his hand, landing several feet away. The men stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Lira stepped forward, her movements fluid and precise. "I told you to leave," she said, her voice unyielding. "This is your last warning." The scarred man, realizing he was no longer in control, signaled to his men. One by one they turned and retreated, their eyes fixed on Lira as if they were seeing her for the first time. They had underestimated her just as Daniel had. As the men disappeared into the distance, Lira let out a long breath and lowered her hand. The tension in the air seemed to dissipate, but the danger was far from over. They had won this round, but it was clear that Lira's past wasn't finished with them yet. Daniel turned to her, his heart racing. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lira met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I didn't want you to see that," she said softly. "But I can't keep hiding anymore. They will keep coming. They won't stop until they get what they want." Daniel's mind was still spinning, trying to process what had just transpired. But one thing was clear. The danger was real, and Lira's past was not going to let them live in peace. "We need to leave," Daniel said, his voice firm. "We can't stay here anymore. They'll come back." Lira nodded, her face unreadable. "Yes, but where will we go? Can we ever escape this?" Daniel didn't have the answer, but for the first time he realized that he wasn't just protecting Lira anymore. He was in this with her, no matter where it led. Love in the shadows. The days after the attack felt like a blur. The constant pressure of the unknown weighed heavily on Daniel and Lira, each passing moment a reminder that their peace was fragile, like the calm before a storm. The farm, once a sanctuary, now felt like a place where they were always on edge. Every sound, every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind seemed to signal a new threat. Daniel didn't know how to make sense of it all. Lyra's power. The strangers who were hunting her. The fear in her eyes when she talked about her past, it was all too much for him to absorb. And yet, somehow, in the chaos and uncertainty, his feelings for her had only grown stronger. There was something about her, something that went beyond her alien nature, beyond the danger that followed her. It was the way she carried herself, the quiet strength in her eyes, the tenderness she showed in the small moments. And despite the power she possessed, despite the darkness that clung to her, there was also a vulnerability, one that she had been hiding from everyone, including him. One night, after a long day of repairs and keeping watch, Daniel found himself sitting on the porch, his thoughts consumed by the events that had unfolded. The stars above him sparkled with an eerie calm, a silent reminder of how far they were from everything they had known. Lira had been distant all day, retreating into herself, her mind clearly occupied with something. Daniel had tried to engage with her to talk about what they needed to do next, but each time she seemed to pull away. It was as if she was carrying a burden she couldn't share. "Lira," Daniel called softly, standing up as he saw her walking toward the barn. She stopped and turned, her eyes meeting his. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice strained. "I've been distant. I didn't mean to push you away." Daniel stepped toward her, the concern in his eyes evident. "It's all right. I just want to know what's going on. What's in your mind? You've been quiet lately." Lyra's gaze faltered, and for a moment she didn't speak. She turned back toward the barn, her shoulders tense. Daniel followed her, unsure of what to do. He had never been good at dealing with emotions, his own, let alone someone else's. But he knew this was important. As they reached the barn, Lira stopped and finally turned to face him. The air between them felt thick, like the weight of the world was pressing down on them both. "I'm scared, Daniel," Lira admitted, her voice breaking the silence. "I'm scared of what's coming. And I'm scared of what I might do to you." Daniel felt his heart tighten in his chest. He had never heard her speak with such raw emotion. She had always been the one who held everything together, who kept her fears locked away. But now, standing in front of him, she was exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. "You don't have to be alone," Daniel said softly, his voice steady, despite the knot of fear in his stomach. He took a step closer, his hand, reaching out to her. "I'm here. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Lira looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find something, some hint of truth. She took a deep breath, and after a long pause, she stepped closer to him. "I don't deserve you, Daniel," she whispered, her voice almost a plea. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has, and all I've done is bring danger into your life. You should be afraid of me." Daniel shook his head, his hand gently cupping her face. "I'm not afraid of you, Lira. I'm afraid of losing you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and full of meaning. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Daniel wasn't sure what had come over him, but he knew in that instant that he couldn't imagine his life without her. Not now. Not ever. Lyra's eyes softened, and she reached out, her fingers brushing his hand gently. It was a simple gesture, but in that touch Daniel felt a spark, a connection that had been building between them for weeks. Something more than just physical attraction. Something deeper, more profound. "You don't know what you're asking." "Daniel," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm not like other women. My past, it's not something I can leave behind. It will always follow me." "I don't care about your past," Daniel replied, his voice firm. "All I care about is right here, right now. We're in this together, no matter what." Lyra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and for the first time since they had met, she let her guard down completely. She stepped forward, her hands reaching up to gently hold his face. The moment felt fragile, like a dream they both feared would vanish if they didn't hold on tightly. And then, without another word, Lira kissed him. It was soft at first, hesitant, as if she was testing the waters. But as Daniel kissed her back, the kiss deepened, a shared understanding flowing between them. In that kiss, they both found something they had been searching for: acceptance, connection, and a promise that they weren't alone in this world. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, both of them breathing heavily. "Don't know what happens next," Lira whispered, her voice raw. "But for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm facing it alone." Daniel smiled, his hand gently brushing her hair back from her face. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice filled with conviction. Together. The night was still, but the world around them felt different, changed. They had crossed a line, but it wasn't just the line between friendship and love. It was a line that marked the beginning of something new, something stronger than either of them had imagined. It was the moment they stopped running from the past and started facing the future side by side. But even in this quiet moment, the storm that was coming could not be ignored. Lira's past would not let them be. But for the first time, Daniel didn't feel like a bystander in his own life. For the first time, he felt like he had something worth fighting for, and that was enough to give him the strength to face whatever came next. The final twist, the days that followed, felt like a strange mix of normalcy and impending doom. Though the quiet of the farm was soothing, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that their peace was slipping through his fingers, like water escaping through his grasp. He and Lira had settled into a new routine. They worked together, spoke more openly, and shared moments of comfort. But there was always the nagging awareness that something was coming, that something was always lurking just beyond their reach. The men who had come for Lira had not returned, but Daniel knew they wouldn't stop. They would find her eventually. They always did. The danger was far from over, and Lira's past, her bloodline, would eventually catch up to them. He couldn't ignore it no matter how much he wanted to. But still, the days stretched on. They were quiet, almost peaceful, until one morning when everything changed. Daniel had just finished his breakfast when Lira called him from the barn. There was an urgency in her voice that caught his attention, and his heart skipped a beat. He rushed outside, finding her standing near the doorway, her expression grave. "Lira, what's wrong?" Daniel asked, his voice thick with concern. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her shoulders stiff. Daniel could see the tension in her, the way her breath was shallow, the way she clenched her fists. She was afraid. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Daniel stepped closer to her, his mind racing. He had thought they had shared everything. He had thought there were no more secrets between them. But the look in her eyes told him that something was different this time. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lira took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and something else, something Daniel couldn't quite place. "I'm pregnant, Daniel," she said, the words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. His mind spun, trying to process what she had just said. Pregnant? How could she be pregnant? They hadn't planned this. They hadn't even talked about it. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath catching in his throat. His thoughts were a jumbled mess, but one thing was clear. This was not a simple situation. I don't understand," he stammered, his mind still grappling with the news. "How is this possible?" Lira looked down, her eyes clouded with a mixture of fear and regret. "My people, we bond differently than humans. When we connect with someone, truly connect, it can create something between us. Something that lasts forever. But I never thought it would happen like this." Daniel's mind raced. He had always known that Lira was different, that her past was shrouded in mystery. But this was something beyond anything he had imagined. She was carrying his child, a child that was part human, part alien. "Does anyone else know?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with worry. "No," Lira replied softly. "I didn't want to tell you, I didn't want to burden you with this, but I can't keep it from you anymore." Daniel reached for her, his hand trembling as he touched her arm. "We'll figure this out. Together. No matter what." But even as he spoke the words, a deep gnawing fear settled in his chest. A child like this, part human, part alien, would not be accepted by the world. The very thing that made their connection beautiful also made it dangerous. They could never live a normal life. They would always be hunted, always be outcasts. Lira's voice broke through his thoughts. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to bring you into this world, Daniel. But now there's no turning back. I can't protect you from what's coming. Not anymore. The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. They were in deeper than he had realized. This wasn't just about her past anymore, it was about their future, their survival, and the child that was now a part of them both. I don't care about any of that, Daniel said, his voice firm. I care about you. I care about us. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect our family. Lira's eyes softened, but there was a sadness in them that Daniel couldn't ignore. She reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers cool against his skin. I don't know if we can protect this child from what's coming, but I will try. I promise I will try. Before Daniel could respond, a sound broke through the stillness of the air. It was distant at first, barely audible over the wind. But then it grew louder, a deep rhythmic thrum that seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. Lira's eyes widened in alarm. They're here, she whispered, her voice filled with dread. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the sound. He could hear the rumble of engines, the heavy tread of boots on the earth. It wasn't just one group. It wasn't just a few men. They had come for her, and now they were coming for him, too. We don't have time, Lira said urgently, grabbing his arm. We need to leave, now. Daniel didn't need any more convincing. He pulled Lira toward the back of the barn, his mind racing as he tried to think of an escape. They had no time to pack, no time to plan. They had to leave, and they had to leave fast. As they reached the edge of the property, Daniel turned to look back at the house one last time. Everything he had worked for, everything he had known, was slipping away. But in that moment, as he held Lira's hand and felt the weight of her unborn child between them, he knew one thing for certain. They had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came next.